The little black girl knocked for the biker after hearing her stepfather threaten someone in the basement below. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the story. It was a quiet night in the small town of Clearwater, and the air was thick with the scent of the rain that had just passed. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the old house at the end of Oak Street. Inside, a young girl, no older than 9, sat huddled on the stairs. Her small hands gripped the edges of the worn wooden railing as she listened, her heart pounding in her chest. Below her, in the basement, she could hear the voice of her stepfather, muffled but unmistakable. "You better keep quiet, or you'll regret it," his voice growled. There was a heavy thud, followed by a gasp. The girl's body froze. Her stepfather had done this before, but tonight felt different. There was a sharpness in his tone, a threat that chilled her to the bone. The air around her seemed to grow colder as the seconds ticked by. She didn't know who he was talking to or what was going on, but she knew it wasn't good. The last time she had tried to speak up, she had been punished. Her mind raced, thinking of all the times she had been afraid to speak out, the times she had been too scared to ask for help. But tonight, something inside her shifted. She could hear the sounds of someone pleading, then another thud. Her stomach twisted with fear. The basement was dark, cold, and the smell of something stale lingered in the air. The girl slowly stood up, her small body trembling as she tiptoed toward the door. The house was eerily silent now, save for the faint murmurs from below. She swallowed hard, wiping the tears from her eyes. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. Her heart raced. As she reached for the door handle, she had to leave. She had to find someone who could help her. And then, she remembered the bikers. She had heard stories about them from her schoolmates. Tough, scary, and always there for those who needed help. Could they really be her salvation? She didn't know for sure, but she had no other choice. Without thinking, she flung the door open and ran out into the night, her feet pounding against the pavement. She ran as fast as she could, not looking back, her breath coming in short gasps. Her feet were bare, and the cold wind stung her skin, but she didn't care. She just needed to get away. She ran past the empty houses, the dim streetlights casting shadows that seemed to follow her every step. The street felt longer than usual, as though the town was stretching out before her in a cruel game of hide and seek. The sound of her heart thundering in her ears drowned out everything else, until she reached the corner where the biker bar stood. She had seen it many times before, but tonight it felt different. This was her last hope. She didn't know what to expect, but she was willing to try anything. She gathered what little courage she had left and knocked on the door. Seconds later, the door swung open, revealing a large figure. A man, tall and muscular, with a tattooed face and a look of surprise in his eyes. "What's wrong, kid?" he asked, his voice deep and rough. The girl took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Please, you have to help me," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "My stepdad, he's hurting someone in the basement. Please, you have to stop him." The biker didn't hesitate. He stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. "Stay here, kid," he said, his tone firm. "We'll handle it." And just like that, the girl's life was about to change forever. The large biker who opened the door stepped aside, his eyes scanning the street quickly before turning back to the small, scared girl standing in front of him. He wasn't sure what to expect, but her terrified eyes told him everything. He motioned for her to come inside, and she hesitated for only a moment before stepping past him into the warm, dimly lit interior of the biker bar. The heavy scent of leather and motor oil filled the air, and the low hum of conversation stopped as everyone turned to look at the newcomer. She was trembling, her clothes torn and her feet bare, but the look in her eyes spoke louder than anything else. "Stay right here," the biker said, his voice deep and steady. He turned to the others. "We got a situation. I need backup, now." He turned back to the girl, squatting down to her level. "What's your name, kid?" "Aisha," she whispered, her voice still shaky. "Aisha, I need you to tell me everything. Who's down there? Who's in that basement?" She swallowed hard. tears welling up in her eyes. My stepdad, he's hurting someone. I heard him yelling, and then I heard a thud. Please, you have to stop him. The biker, who introduced himself as Jack, nodded grimly. You did the right thing, Aisha. We're gonna take care of this. I promise you that. He straightened up, motioning for his crew to gather around. Get the bikes ready. We're heading to her house. We don't know what we're walking into, but we need to move fast. Within moments, the other bikers were preparing for action, their leather jackets moving in synchronized chaos. The sound of boots hitting the floor was drowned out by the rumble of motorcycle engines revving to life outside. Jack, his face set in a grim expression, turned to Aisha one last time before heading out. Stay here, we'll be back for you. Aisha nodded, clutching her arms around herself for warmth. She could barely process what was happening. Only minutes ago, she had been running for her life. But now, there was a glimmer of hope. She watched through the window as the bikers mounted their motorcycles, the roar of their engines deafening as they formed a line outside, ready to go. Jack's voice came through her earpiece as he gave instructions. All right, we've got a mile ahead of us. Bear, you take point. Diesel, I need you watching the back. The rest of us, we move in tight. No one makes a move until we're inside. Aisha's heart raced as the convoy of bikes sped down the road, the wind whipping past her as she stood frozen by the window. Her mind raced with thoughts of what might be happening back at the house. She couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right choice by running. The fear of what they might find in the basement gnawed at her. Jack's voice crackled through her earpiece once again. Aisha, don't worry. You're safe with us. We'll handle this. The miles seemed to stretch on forever as they neared the house. The sun had started to set, and the air had grown colder. As they pulled up to the street, Jack signaled for everyone to cut their engines. The bikers lined up in front of the house, and the street fell eerily silent. They didn't want to alert anyone inside, but the tension was palpable. Jack led the way to the front door, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Stay low and stay quiet, he instructed, his voice calm but commanding. We don't know who or what we're up against in there. Aisha, her heart thumping in her chest, followed closely behind. She could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of what they were about to face. She had never been this close to something like this before. Jack reached the door first and turned the handle. The door creaked open slowly, and the room beyond was dark. Jack motioned for the others to follow. Stay together, he ordered. The bikers entered the house, their boots making soft thuds against the floor as they spread out. Aisha stayed close to Jack, her eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of danger. The air was heavy with tension, but Jack remained focused, moving through the house with purpose. He signaled for the group to head toward the basement door. As they approached, they could hear muffled voices coming from below. Aisha's stomach twisted with dread. She had heard those voices before, the harsh, cold tone of her stepfather. Jack stopped in front of the door. Stay back, he whispered. He reached for the door handle and twisted it slowly, his muscles tense. The door opened with a creak, and the smell of dampness and musty air hit them. Jack raised his hand, signaling for everyone to stay silent. He motioned for two bikers to flank the door, and with a deep breath, he stepped inside, followed by the rest of the crew. The basement was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. There, in the corner, her stepfather stood, his back to them. He was pacing, his voice low and menacing. You don't want to cross me, he muttered. You won't get away with it. Jack stepped forward, his presence commanding. That's enough, he said, his voice steady but firm. The stepfather froze, turning slowly to face the bikers. His face went pale as he realized who had entered. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. You're done, Jack said, taking a step closer. This ends now. The tension in the room was thick, and Aisha, standing behind Jack, could hardly believe what was happening. She had run to them for help, and now, the bikers were making good on their promise. She wasn't alone anymore. The room was heavy with silence as the stepfather stood frozen, eyes locked on Jack, his body tense with a mixture of fear and anger. His mouth opened, but the words never came, only a nervous stammer. Jack's eyes, sharp and unblinking, held the man in place. His voice was calm, but there was a finality in it that sent a chill down everyone's spine. It's over. You're done here. The stepfather took a half step back, his hand instinctively reaching for his belt, where a gun was holstered. But before he could make a move, Jack's voice cut through the tension again. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The room seemed to hold its breath. The rest of the bikers stood motionless, their presence towering behind Jack like a wall of steel and leather. Aisha, still standing at the edge of the basement, could barely process the scene unfolding before her. She had never imagined this moment. The bikers, the danger, and the promise of safety now coming true. But it wasn't over yet. Her stepfather, now fully aware of the bikers' determination, seemed to recognize that there was no escape. His face paled, and the defiance in his eyes began to waver. "You don't understand," he muttered, almost to himself. "I won't go down like this. I've got connections. You think you can just waltz in here and—" Jack cut him off, stepping forward with a slow, deliberate pace. "Shut up. You think your badge or your ties can protect you now? You've crossed a line that you can't come back from." The stepfather's face twisted in anger as he clenched his fists, but his fear was evident, his shoulders trembling. He looked around at the bikers, then back at Jack. "You don't know who you're messing with." Jack's expression remained unchanged. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm messing with. And right now, you're out of luck." The room fell into an uneasy stillness. Aisha felt her heart race as she stood there, watching, waiting. She had never seen her stepfather like this before, cornered, vulnerable. She had always seen him as the one in control, the one who held all the power in the house. But now, he was just a man, standing alone against a force far greater than he could have ever imagined. The bikers moved in slowly, their eyes scanning the room. Bear, the largest of them, stepped forward, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the stepfather. His voice was low and menacing. "You made a mistake. A big one. And now you're going to pay for it." The stepfather glanced nervously between the bikers, his eyes shifting from one to the next, calculating his chances of escaping. But it was clear that there were none. He was trapped. Aisha stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke for the first time since entering the basement. "Please," she whispered, "don't hurt him. Just make him leave. Make him go." Jack turned to her, his eyes softening slightly. "You don't have to worry, Aisha. We're not here to hurt anyone. We're here to make sure you're safe." The words hung in the air, a promise that seemed almost too good to be true. Aisha nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and uncertainty. She had heard stories of bikers like this, rough, tough, and always ready for a fight, but she never imagined they would be the ones to save her. Jack turned back to the stepfather. "You've got two choices. You can leave now, and we don't call the cops. You can disappear, and we'll pretend we never saw you." The stepfather looked at Jack, his eyes narrowing, but there was no defiance left in them. He was broken, defeated. "And if I don't leave?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jack's voice hardened, cold and final. "Then we'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Your secrets won't stay hidden anymore. Not with us around." The stepfather didn't speak again. His shoulders slumped. As he realized the weight of the situation, he had no way out. He slowly turned and walked toward the stairs, his head bowed in shame, his every step heavy with defeat. As he reached the top of the stairs, he glanced back over his shoulder, but no one stopped him. The bikers stood in silence, watching him leave. The moment he was out of the house, the tension that had hung in the air seemed to dissipate, leaving behind a stillness that was almost unnatural. Jack turned to Aisha, his face softening with a rare smile. "You're safe now. He won't hurt you again." Aisha blinked back tears, the weight of everything she had been holding and crashing over her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Jack nodded, his voice steady. "You don't have to thank us. This is what we do. We protect those who can't protect themselves." The rest of the bikers nodded in agreement, each of them standing taller in the quiet aftermath of the confrontation. They had done their job, and they had done it well. Aisha felt the knot in her stomach begin to loosen, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could finally breathe. The nightmare was over. The bikers had kept their promise. And now, with the stepfather gone, Aisha could begin to imagine a life free from fear. The sound of the motorcycle engines faded as Jack and the other bikers remained in the quiet basement, each one absorbing the weight of the moment. Aisha stood in the center of the room, her body still shaking, her mind trying to process everything that had just happened. The noise from the street, the faint hum of the motorcycles, and the distant chatter of the bar outside seemed so far away now. All she could hear was her own heartbeat, pounding in her chest, echoing in her ears. Jack approached her slowly, his face calm but full of compassion. "You're safe now," he said softly, his voice reassuring. "You don't have to worry about him anymore." Aisha nodded slowly, but the knot in her stomach remained. She had been so afraid, but now that it was over, it was hard to believe. She looked around the basement, the place where so much pain had been hidden. For so long, the walls seemed to close in on her, memories of fear and helplessness lingering in every corner. "I don't know how to thank you," Aisha whispered, her voice still trembling. Jack shook his head. "You don't have to thank us. This is what we do. We protect those who can't protect themselves." He paused, looking around the basement, then turned back to her. "But now, we need to make sure you're not alone. We're not leaving until we're sure you're all right." The other bikers, who had been standing quietly in the background, moved forward. Diesel, the large man who had stayed silent through most of the ordeal, stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on Aisha's shoulder. "We've got your back," he said in his low, rumbling voice. "Whatever you need, we'll help." Aisha's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding in. The tension of the past few hours, the fear, the terror of what might have happened, all of it seemed to break open in that moment. She wasn't alone. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone cared. And that thought, the thought that she mattered, was more than she had ever expected. Jack stepped back, giving Aisha space to breathe. "I think it's time we get out of here. There's no need to stay in this place anymore. Let's get you somewhere safe." Aisha wiped her eyes and nodded, following Jack as he motioned for the others to head back to the front door. The bikers moved as one, like a well-oiled machine, guiding her out of the house and back into the night. The cold air hit Aisha's face as she stepped outside, but it felt different now. The chill wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. She was free. The motorcycles were lined up outside, their engines rumbling as the bikers mounted their bikes, ready to leave. Aisha stood for a moment, looking back at the house that had held so many dark memories. It felt surreal that it was over, that the nightmare was finally over. She wasn't sure what to do next, but she knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. Jack approached her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're taking you to a safe place," he said. "There's a house a few miles from here where you can stay for as long as you need. It's one of our safe houses. You'll be safe there, Aisha." She looked up at him, her face softening with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack smiled at her. "You don't need to thank us. We're family, and we protect family." The bikers revved their engines, and the convoy slowly pulled away from the house, heading down the dark, quiet street. Aisha sat behind Jack, clutching his jacket, her eyes scanning the street, unsure of what the future would bring. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. The ride to the safe house was a blur of headlights and the hum of the engines. The world around her felt distant, as though she were in a bubble, shielded from the rest of the chaos. But in that moment, she didn't need to know what was next. She just needed to feel safe. As the bikers reached the safe house, a large, well-maintained house surrounded by trees, Aisha felt a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't sure how long it would take to feel normal again, but for now, this was enough. The bikers escorted her inside, where they settled her in a room and made sure she had everything she needed. Jack stayed close by, checking in with her every now and then, making sure she was okay. The rest of the crew made their way back to the bikes, but they left behind a few members to keep watch. The night had been long, and everyone was tired, but there was still a sense of accomplishment in the air. They had kept their promise, and for now, that was all that mattered. Aisha sat on the bed, staring at the window, the faint glow of the streetlights outside casting shadows on the walls. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had control. She wasn't just running from her fears anymore. She was facing them, and with the bikers' help, she had made it through. And somehow, that made all the difference. As she lay back on the bed, the exhaustion from the night's events began to settle in. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the blanket around her. She didn't know how long it would take for her life to return to normal, But for now, she was safe. And that was all she needed. The sun had barely risen when Aisha awoke, the soft rays filtering through the curtains of the small room she had been given in the safe house. The events of the previous night seemed almost like a dream, too surreal to fully grasp. Her body ached from the tension of the past few days, but the exhaustion in her limbs was different now. There was a sense of peace, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She sat up, her eyes scanning the room, the silence a strange comfort. No shouting, no footsteps pounding the floor above her, no sounds of violence creeping into her thoughts. Just the quiet hum of the house and the occasional creak of the floorboards. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Jack's voice cut through the quiet, coming from the doorway. "How you feeling this morning, kid?" He had a kind smile on his face, but Aisha could see the concern in his eyes. She smiled weakly. "I'm all right. Better than I've been in a long time." She swung her legs off the bed, her feet touching the soft carpet. Her mind wandered back to her stepfather, to the basement, to the fear that had gripped her every day. It was hard to imagine that he was gone. "That's good to hear," Jack said as he stepped into the room, his boots clicking against the wooden floor. "We're gonna make sure you're all right. You've been through a lot, and we're not going anywhere until you're safe." Aisha nodded. "I know. I can't believe I'm here. That you all are here." She looked down at her hands, fingers still trembling slightly, a reminder of the terror she had lived with for so long. Jack sat down beside her, his voice low and reassuring. "You don't have to thank us, Aisha. We do this for family. You're safe now, and that's all that matters." The words were simple, but they felt like a weight lifting off her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting alone. Jack stood up and walked toward the door. "You should try to get some rest. We've got some things to take care of today. Just know that. We've got your back, always." Aisha watched him leave, his words settling in her mind. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't terrified of it. She wasn't trapped in a world of fear. The bikers had given her a chance to finally be free. But the weight of what had happened still loomed over her, and she knew she couldn't leave it all behind just yet. As the day went on, Aisha spent most of it in the safe house, trying to relax, trying to process everything that had happened. She found herself pacing around the small living room, looking out the windows at the quiet street. It seemed so normal, so far removed from the chaos she had escaped. She couldn't help but wonder what had become of her stepfather, of the life she had known. What would happen now? Jack had assured her that they would keep her safe, but what did that mean? Would her stepfather come back for her? Would the cops get involved? She didn't know, but she didn't want to find out just yet. She wasn't ready for the world outside. That night, as the bikers gathered around the dinner table, Aisha sat quietly, listening as they talked about their plans. Jack and the others had already made arrangements for her to stay at another safe house, farther from the city, where she could start over. But it didn't feel real. The idea of leaving everything behind, of starting fresh, was both terrifying and freeing. She wanted to believe in it, wanted to believe that she could have a future where she wasn't looking over her shoulder every minute. But the uncertainty still gnawed at her. As the night wore on, Aisha found herself speaking up. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The room fell silent for a moment, the others turning their attention to her. Jack was the first to speak. "We keep you safe, Aisha. That's our job. And once we know you're all right, we'll make sure your stepfather doesn't hurt anyone else. We'll handle it, don't worry." Aisha nodded slowly. "But what if he comes back for me?" she asked, the fear in her voice barely masked. Jack's expression hardened. "He won't. We'll make sure of that. You don't have to worry about him anymore." There was a sense of finality in his words, something that reassured Aisha, but also made her realize just how much had changed. She had no idea what the future would hold, but she knew she didn't want to face it alone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jack gave her a firm nod. "No need to thank us. You're part of the family now, and families take care of each other." As the evening wound down, Aisha retreated to her room, her mind racing. She thought about her life, about the people who had hurt her, and about the bikers who had saved her. They were her family now, and no matter what happened next, she knew she wouldn't have to face it alone. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Aisha felt like she had a future worth fighting for. As she closed her eyes, the last thought in her mind was that she was no longer running. She was finally free. The days passed slowly at the safe house. Aisha had settled into a routine of sorts, though her mind remained restless. The bikers had kept their promise, ensuring her safety at all costs, but the fear still clung to her, like a shadow she couldn't escape. Jack and the others made sure she had everything she needed: food, a comfortable place to sleep, and most importantly, security. She could hear the low hum of the motorcycles outside whenever one of the bikers went on a run. It was a constant reminder that they were always there, watching over her. But even with the protection, the nightmares didn't stop. She woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the echoes of her stepfather's threats ringing in her ears. The quiet house, now her refuge, still felt foreign to her. She was free, yes, but the weight of her past still loomed large. One evening, after dinner, Aisha found herself sitting alone on the porch, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. She stared out at the empty road ahead, the silence broken only by the occasional sound of a distant engine. Her thoughts drifted back to her life before all of this, the fear, the uncertainty, the constant tension in her home. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding in until it was all over. She had been so caught up in surviving that she had forgotten how to live. Jack stepped out onto the porch, his heavy boots making a soft sound on the wooden steps. He sat down beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You doing okay?" he asked, his voice calm, yet filled with genuine concern. Aisha nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. "I'm trying to be," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just hard. I don't know how to be normal anymore. It feels like everything's changed, but it hasn't really. I'm still me." Jack didn't respond right away. He simply sat beside her, his presence a quiet reassurance. After a few moments, he spoke. "You don't have to figure everything out right now. You've been through more than most people ever will. You're allowed to take your time. There's no rush." Aisha looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I just don't want to be afraid anymore. I don't want to feel like I'm running all the time." Jack gave her a soft, understanding look. "You're not running anymore. You're free, and you don't have to do it alone. We're here for you, Aisha. Always." She leaned back against the porch railing, staring up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was allowed to breathe. She wasn't hiding, she wasn't running, and she wasn't alone. The bikers had become her family, and for that, she was grateful. But the past was a heavy burden, and it was something she wasn't sure how to leave behind. Jack seemed to sense her lingering doubts. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "I don't expect you to forget what happened. But you don't have to let it control you either. You've got a new start now. You can make it whatever you want." Aisha turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "How do you do it? How do you move on from everything? From all the pain and fear?" Jack's gaze softened, and he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You don't move on, Aisha. You move through it. It's not about forgetting. It's about finding your strength again. And that takes time. But you've already done the hardest part. You're here, and you're safe." Aisha took a deep breath, her heart slowly starting to ease. "I want to believe that," she said quietly. Jack smiled and patted her shoulder. "Then start with one day at a time. You don't have to have it all figured out today, but you're on the right path. You've got a family now. You've got people who will fight for you." Aisha nodded, feeling a small sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Over the next few weeks, Aisha began to adjust to life at the safe house. She spent her days in quiet reflection, sometimes helping around the house, sometimes taking long walks in the nearby woods. The bikers went about their usual routines, always keeping a watchful eye on her, but they also made sure she had space to heal. Aisha didn't speak much about her past. She didn't need to. The bikers understood. They had their own scars, their own stories of pain and survival. But they didn't push her. They let her take things at her own pace, offering support without expectation. One afternoon, Jack took Aisha aside. "How would you feel about starting fresh?" he asked, his eyes gentle. "I've got a friend who owns a small diner a couple hours away. It's quiet, peaceful, a place where you could lay low, maybe even start working if you want." Aisha considered the offer. She had always loved the idea of cooking, but after everything, she wasn't sure if she was ready to step into the world again. "It sounds nice," she said slowly, "but I don't know if I'm ready for that." Jack nodded, his expression understanding. "You don't have to be ready yet. But the offer stands. When you're ready, we'll get you there. For the first time in weeks, Aisha felt a spark of hope. Maybe she could start over. Maybe she could find peace, one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, Aisha began to envision a future that didn't involve fear. She began to think about what she wanted for herself, not what her stepfather had wanted, not what anyone else had expected of her. She wanted a life of her own, and with the bikers' support, she was beginning to believe that it was possible. The road ahead wasn't clear, and there were still days when the weight of her past felt like too much to bear. But for the first time in a long time, Aisha had hope. And that was enough to take the next step. The days turned into weeks, and Aisha found herself slowly adjusting to the new life the bikers had promised her. The small safe house was a haven, a place of quiet refuge, and she began to appreciate the calm it offered after years of chaos. Yet, the past was never far from her mind, and the weight of it sometimes pressed on her chest like an uninvited guest. Despite the gentle pace of the days, she knew she couldn't stay in this bubble forever. The world outside still existed, and the memories of her stepfather's threats haunted her every step. One morning, Jack approached her with a proposal that made her pause. "Aisha," he said, his voice warm but serious, "we've been keeping an eye on things, and we've heard whispers. Your stepdad's not the type to let things go easily. He might have people looking for you. But we're ready. We're all here for you." Aisha stood by the window, staring out at the peaceful countryside. The bike engines roared in the distance as the bikers went about their usual business, always alert, always prepared. It was comforting, in a way, but it also reminded her of how much she was still running from. "What do you mean, ready?" she asked, turning to face him. "What can I do? I'm still scared. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." Jack smiled gently, a knowing look in his eyes. "You don't have to fight this alone, Aisha. That's why we're here. We take care of our own. But I'm asking you to make a choice. You can stay here, keep hiding, or you can start living your life. And that means stepping up, taking control of your future." His words hit her harder than she expected. For the first time, she realized how much she had been letting fear control her. She had been so focused on surviving, she hadn't stopped to think about what she really wanted, what she deserved. Could she really start over, or would the past always follow her? "I don't know what to do," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack stepped closer, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I know it's hard. It always is. But if you want to be free, you have to face it. And we're right behind you. We won't let anything happen to you." Aisha looked at him, then out the window again, her gaze distant. She was so used to running, to hiding, to being afraid. But this was different. She wasn't running anymore. She didn't have to be. Slowly, a sense of determination began to rise within her. Maybe it wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about taking back her life, one step at a time. The sound of the bikers' engines grew louder, and Aisha felt a strange sense of strength. They were ready for whatever came next. And so was she. Over the next few days, Aisha began to help out more around the safe house. She learned how to cook meals, how to organize the little things that kept the house running smoothly. The bikers were patient with her, never rushing, always making sure she felt supported. And through it all, she realized something. She wasn't alone. The fear still lurked in the corners of her mind. But the community she had found with the bikers gave her a foundation she had never known before. She began to think more about the future. Jack's offer to work at the diner lingered in her mind. Could she really start a new life there? Could she leave behind the past and embrace something new? She wasn't sure, but she knew she had to try. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Aisha stood outside, feeling the cool breeze on her face. She felt different, stronger. The house, the bikers, and everything in between had become more than just a safe place. It had become a symbol of her strength. She wasn't just hiding from her stepfather anymore. She was living. She had a choice now. "Hey, kid," Jack called out from behind her, interrupting her thoughts. "I've got a lead on something. We may need to move soon, but for now, we're secure. If you want to, we could head over to that diner tomorrow. You think you're ready for that?" Aisha turned to face him, feeling a newfound sense of purpose in her chest. "I think I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. Jack grinned, his approval clear in his expression. "Good. We'll take it one step at a time." As Aisha stood there, looking at the horizon, she realized that life was no longer something she had to run from. It was something she could face head-on. And with the bikers by her side, she knew that no matter what the future held, she wouldn't have to face it alone. The next few days passed in a blur for Aisha. The decision to move forward and leave her past behind wasn't easy, but with every passing moment at the safe house, she felt herself getting stronger. Jack had kept his promise, providing her with not just a place to stay but a sense of belonging she never thought she'd find. She worked alongside the bikers in the small community they had created, learning the ropes of their world and becoming a part of it. But there was always that lingering thought. What if her stepfather was still out there? What if the nightmare wasn't over yet? Aisha had tried to push those thoughts aside, but the fear still crept in at night. She had yet to fully trust that she was safe. One evening, after a long day of work around the house, Aisha was sitting on the porch, staring out into the fading light of the evening. Her thoughts wandered back to the diner Jack had mentioned, and for the first time, the idea didn't seem so impossible. The thought of starting fresh somewhere new, away from all the chaos, was enticing. She could rebuild her life. She could make it her own. As the sun set behind the trees, Jack came up to her, his steps heavy but deliberate. He stood next to her for a moment, looking out at the horizon. "You've been thinking about the diner, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low. Aisha nodded, feeling a sense of hesitation but also a spark of excitement. "Yeah, I think it might be time." Jack smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made Aisha feel even more at ease. "You're ready, Aisha. We all are. Whatever happens, we've got your back." His words, simple but full of meaning, gave her the push she needed. She stood up, feeling a sense of determination settle in her chest. "I want to go. I want to try." Jack nodded. "Then tomorrow we'll make it happen. You'll be just fine." The next morning, after a quiet breakfast with the bikers, Aisha packed a small bag, the weight of the decision settling heavily on her shoulders. The safe house, the bikers, everything that had kept her safe for so long, it was all about to change. But she was ready. It felt like she had no other choice. As the motorcycles roared to life, Aisha climbed onto the back of Jack's bike, her heart racing with anticipation. The wind was cold as it whipped against her face, but she welcomed it. For the first time, she felt like she was moving forward, and it felt good. The ride to the diner was long, but it gave Aisha time to think. The road stretched out before her, a metaphor for the new life she was about to begin. She could still feel the weight of her past, but now, it didn't feel as heavy. She wasn't alone. She wasn't running anymore. As they arrived at the diner, Aisha was struck by how different everything looked. It was a small, family-run establishment, nestled on a quiet street. The sign outside was weathered, but it had a warmth to it that reminded her of something familiar, something safe. A part of her hesitated, wondering if she was really ready for this. But Jack's reassuring presence beside her reminded her that she was not alone in this. They entered the diner, and the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air. The place was cozy, with a few tables scattered around, and an old jukebox played softly in the corner. Behind the counter stood an older woman with a kind smile. "Jack, it's good to see you," she greeted, wiping her hands on her apron. Jack smiled back, his eyes warm. "Good to see you too, Marie. This is Aisha," he said, gesturing to the girl standing nervously by the door. Marie looked at Aisha with a gentle expression. "Nice to meet you, dear," she said, her voice soft and welcoming. "Jack's told me a little about you." Aisha smiled shyly, still unsure of what to say. "Nice to meet you too," she replied, her voice quiet. Marie nodded, noticing the hesitation in Aisha's eyes. "You'll be all right here, sweetheart. We'll take care of you." It wasn't the grand beginning Aisha had imagined, but in that moment, it felt like exactly what she needed, a fresh start, with a kind and steady presence. She had found her place, a place where she could be herself and start over. The next few weeks were a blur of new routines. Aisha worked alongside Marie, learning how to make coffee, serve meals, and handle the regulars who came in. The diner became her new home, and the work was a welcome distraction. Slowly, she began to feel like she belonged there. The bikers, too, made sure she was never alone. They came by often, checking in on her, offering support, and reminding her that they were always just a call away. Even with all the love and support, there were still moments when the weight of her past crept in, when she would hear a car engine in the distance, or a knock at the door, and her heart would skip a beat. But every time that happened, She remembered the bikers, and she remembered Jack's words. "We've got your back." One evening, as she was closing the diner with Marie, Aisha sat down at the counter, a cup of coffee in hand. She stared at the steam rising from her mug, lost in thought. Marie came over and sat next to her. "You're doing great, Aisha," she said, her voice comforting. Aisha smiled, though it was tinged with uncertainty. "I just keep wondering if I'm really ready for this. I've spent so much of my life running. I don't know how to stop." Marie looked at her with understanding eyes. "You don't need to have it all figured out. Just take it one day at a time. You're not running anymore, Aisha. You're living." Those words settled deep in Aisha's heart, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She wasn't running. She was finally living. And for the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future of her own. Weeks passed, and Aisha felt herself gradually adjusting to this new rhythm of life. The diner had become more than just a place of work. It had become a sanctuary. The familiar faces of the regular customers, the sound of the coffee machine bubbling in the background, and the gentle hum of conversation all felt like a comforting backdrop to her healing process. She was no longer constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for something to go wrong. Slowly but surely, she was finding herself again. Jack and the bikers continued to check in on her, their presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. She'd grown close to them, especially to Marie, who had taken her in like a daughter. They spent many late evenings together, talking about life, and sometimes, Marie would share her own stories of struggle and resilience, letting Aisha know that even in the darkest of times, there was always a way forward. One late afternoon, after the dinner rush had slowed, Aisha was sitting at the counter, sipping on a glass of iced tea. The diner had quieted down, and the golden light of the setting sun streamed through the windows. She was lost in thought, thinking about how far she had come, when the sound of a motorcycle engine pulled her back to the present. Her heart skipped a beat as she glanced out the window. Jack's bike pulled into the parking lot, followed by a few other bikers. She hadn't seen them for a few days, and a part of her had missed their presence. She quickly stood up and made her way to the door, feeling a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. Jack smiled as he saw her approaching, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "How's everything going?" he asked, his deep voice filled with warmth. Aisha smiled back, relieved to see him. "Good. It's been nice, actually," she replied, feeling the truth of her words. "I'm getting used to this, normal." Jack nodded, his expression softening. "You're doing great, Aisha. Better than I expected." She blushed slightly, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. It had been a while since anyone had told her she was doing well, and it felt good to hear it. "It's all thanks to you, and everyone else. I don't know what I would have done without you all." Jack gave a slight shake of his head. "You did the hard part. You're the one who got up and started walking." Aisha chuckled softly, looking down at her hands. She was still getting used to the idea that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and for the first time, it felt like she had a future. The bikers gathered around the counter, exchanging jokes and light-hearted conversation. Aisha watched them, feeling a sense of gratitude for their support. They had come to mean more to her than she had ever imagined, and as she looked at Jack, she knew that he had been right. She wasn't alone. But as the night wore on and the diner started to empty out, a feeling of unease began to settle in. Aisha couldn't shake the nagging thought that things might not be as settled as they seemed. Her stepfather was still out there, somewhere, and while the bikers had promised to protect her, she couldn't help but wonder if the danger was really over. The thought gnawed at her, and she tried to push it away, but it wouldn't leave. "You okay?" Jack asked, noticing her distant look. Aisha looked up at him, her heart pounding. I don't know. I just can't shake the feeling that he might come back. That he's still out there, looking for me." Jack's face softened, and he stepped closer to her. "Listen to me, Aisha. You've done everything right. You've come a long way, and we're not letting anything happen to you. You don't have to carry that weight alone anymore." His words, simple as they were, brought her a sense of comfort. She wasn't alone. The bikers had her back. Jack's voice was steady and firm as he continued. "We've already made sure he's not a threat anymore. If he shows up, we'll handle it. But right now, I want you to stop worrying. You've got a new life here. Focus on that. Focus on what you want to build, not what's behind you." Aisha nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't easy to let go of the fear that had been a constant companion for so long, but she knew he was right. She couldn't keep looking over her shoulder. It was time to face forward and move on. Jack smiled and patted her on the shoulder. You're stronger than you know, and you've got an entire family behind you. As the night came to a close and the bikers began to leave, Aisha felt a renewed sense of peace settle within her. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of her mind, but it wasn't as loud anymore. She was building something new, something worth fighting for. And with the support of the bikers, she knew she could face whatever came next. As she locked up the diner for the night, Aisha stood outside for a moment, taking in the cool night air. The sound of the motorcycles fading into the distance was a familiar, comforting reminder of the family she had found. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of it. She was ready to live. She was ready to face whatever came next, and she knew she wouldn't be alone. The following weeks were filled with a quiet rhythm for Aisha, as she continued to settle into her new life at the diner. The work was steady, the days simple but meaningful, and the constant presence of the bikers ensured that she felt safe and supported. Despite all the progress she had made, the fears still lingered, like a shadow in the corner of her mind that would not fully fade. Every time the door opened, or the wind rattled the windows, she found herself tensing, waiting for the familiar, ominous sound of her stepfather's voice. But with each passing day, the anxiety lessened. She had learned to focus on the now, the work she had to do, the people she had come to care about, and the small victories of getting through each day without looking over her shoulder. It was a slow process, but she was moving forward. One evening, after closing the diner, Aisha was walking home when she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. A black SUV was parked near the entrance to the alley. Her heart skipped a beat, and her hand instinctively reached for her phone in her pocket. The memories flooded back in an instant. The fear, the threats, the uncertainty. But as she stood there, watching the vehicle, she realized that she was no longer the scared girl she used to be. She wasn't alone anymore. The bikers had her back. With a deep breath, Aisha started to walk toward the SUV. Her steps were measured, her pace slow but confident. As she got closer, the door of the vehicle opened, and a figure stepped out. A man in a black leather jacket. He wasn't tall or imposing, but something about the way he carried himself made Aisha feel uneasy. She stopped in her tracks, her heart racing again. The man took a step toward her, and she instinctively reached for the phone in her pocket, her finger hovering over the screen. "Hey there," the man said with a smirk, his voice smooth but somehow threatening. "I've been looking for you." Aisha's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't good. She needed to get out of there, fast. But before she could move, she heard the familiar sound of motorcycles roaring in the distance. A feeling of relief washed over her. She wasn't alone. As the bikes drew closer, the man's expression shifted from confident to nervous. He took a step back, eyeing the approaching bikers. Aisha didn't need to look to know who they were. Jack and the others had come. "You're not welcome here." Jack's voice boomed as he pulled up beside Aisha, his bike coming to a stop. The other bikers followed suit, surrounding the man with their bikes, their presence a silent but undeniable force. The man hesitated, clearly weighing his options. "I don't want any trouble," he muttered, trying to back away. "I'm just here to talk." Jack's gaze hardened, his voice calm but unwavering. "You don't need to talk to her. You need to leave. Now." The man glanced nervously at the group, realizing that he wasn't going to get anywhere. With one last, lingering look at Aisha, he turned and quickly got back into his SUV. As the engine roared to life and the vehicle sped off into the night, Aisha let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She hadn't seen her stepfather's associates in months, and to see them now, after everything, sent a wave of fear crashing through her again. But this time, she didn't have to face it alone. "Are you all right?" Jack asked, his voice filled with concern as he dismounted his bike and walked over to her. Aisha nodded, her heart still pounding in her chest. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little shaken." "You did good," Jack said, giving her a reassuring smile. "You didn't run. You stood your ground." Aisha looked at him, her lips trembling. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. For people to keep showing up. I thought it was over." Jack's expression softened. "It's never easy, Aisha. You've been through a lot. But you're stronger than you think. And you don't have to face it alone." Not now, not ever. Aisha's eyes welled up with tears. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace in her chest. She wasn't just surviving. She was living, and with the bikers around her, she knew she didn't have to live in fear anymore. The days that followed were quiet. The bikers continued their routines, keeping watch, but things felt different now. Aisha wasn't afraid of every shadow or every sound. She had found a new sense of strength, one that wasn't based on running or hiding, but on facing the challenges ahead. As the weeks passed, she spent more time with Jack and the others, getting to know them better, forming bonds that felt deeper than anything she had ever experienced before. They weren't just protecting her, they were showing her how to live again. Jack made good on his promise. Aisha didn't have to worry about the past chasing her anymore. She had a future to look forward to, a future she was finally ready to embrace. One afternoon, Jack pulled her aside. "You've done a hell of a job, Aisha. I think it's time you take the next step." Aisha looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Jack smiled, his eyes full of pride. "The diner. You've been working there for a while now, and you've done more than just survive. You're thriving. And I think it's time for you to take control. You want to run the place? Make it your own." Aisha's heart skipped a beat. The idea of running the diner had seemed like a distant dream when she first started, but now, it felt possible. She looked at Jack, her voice steady. "I think I'm ready." Jack nodded. "I knew you would be. It wasn't just a job. It was a new beginning. And this time, Aisha was ready to take it. It had been a few months since Aisha decided to take control of her life, and in that time, she had transformed. The diner had become her sanctuary, a place where she could build something new from the ground up. With Jack and the bikers always nearby, she no longer felt the fear she once did. Instead, she found herself growing into the woman she had always wanted to be. The old worries that plagued her mind, thoughts of her stepfather, of the past, no longer held the power they once did. She was creating a future for herself, one day at a time. That morning, the air was crisp, and the sun had barely risen as Aisha prepared for another busy day at the diner. She arrived early, as she always did, to make sure everything was ready. The clinking of dishes, the whir of the coffee machine, and the buzz of early morning conversations were a welcome soundtrack to her new life. She had a steady flow of customers now, many of whom had become regulars. The diner's small-town charm was working, and Aisha could feel the changes in herself, too. She was no longer just a waitress trying to survive. She was running the place, making decisions, and taking pride in the work she did. As the hours passed, and the diner filled with people, Jack stopped by to check in, as he often did. He came in, his leather jacket creaking as he walked toward the counter. "How's it going today?" he asked, a smile tugging at his lips as he leaned against the counter. Aisha looked up from the register and grinned back at him. "Busy as always," she replied, feeling a rush of pride. "But it feels good. I'm starting to think I might really have a future here." Jack's smile deepened, and he nodded. "I knew you would. You've got a good head on your shoulders, Aisha, and you're tougher than you give yourself credit for." She laughed lightly, the compliment sinking in. She hadn't heard words like that in a long time, not from anyone other than the bikers. They had helped her see a side of herself that she had long buried. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving. The afternoon passed quickly, and by evening, the diner had quieted down. Aisha took a moment to sit in the back, sipping a cup of tea and catching her breath. As she stared out the window, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had gone from running in fear to standing tall, building a life she could be proud of. And with the bikers by her side, she knew she was capable of even more. That was when she heard the sound of a motorcycle engine revving outside. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a split second, the familiar anxiety crept up on her. But then she remembered. She wasn't alone. She wasn't running anymore. Jack entered the diner again, his eyes scanning the room. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his tone serious. Aisha stood up, her curiosity piqued. "What's going on?" Jack hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We've gotten word that your stepfather might be making some moves. We don't know the full details, but we're keeping an eye on things." Aisha felt the tension rise in her chest, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "Do you think he's coming here?" Jack shook his head. "We're not sure, but we're not taking any chances. We're keeping tabs on him. If he shows up, we'll be ready." Aisha took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm in her mind. She didn't want to go back to that fear. She didn't want to let her stepfather control her life any longer. But the thought of him being so close, of everything she had built being at risk, made her heart race. Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've got you, Aisha. You're not in this alone. We'll make sure you're safe, no matter what." She nodded slowly, trying to absorb his words. The fear still lingered in her heart, but the strength in Jack's voice reminded her that she didn't have to face it alone. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling her shoulders relax for the first time in what felt like days. Jack gave her a slight smile. "That's what family's for." Over the next few days, Aisha couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She kept a close watch on the diner, her senses heightened as she went about her work. The bikers stayed close, as they always did, watching over her, ensuring that everything was secure. Jack and the others kept reassuring her that they were ready for anything, but Aisha couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the back of her mind. Then, one afternoon, as Aisha was cleaning up after the lunch rush, the door to the diner swung open. The familiar sound of a motorcycle engine rumbled outside, but this time, it wasn't one of the bikers. A man in a leather jacket stepped inside, his face partially obscured by the shadows. Aisha's heart stopped. She knew immediately who it was. Her stepfather. She stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. He was here, after all this time. But she wasn't the scared girl she used to be. She wasn't running. She was ready. As the man stepped closer, Jack appeared from the back of the diner, his presence a shield between Aisha and the man who had caused her so much pain. "You need to leave." Jack's voice was firm, unwavering. The man looked at Jack, then back at Aisha, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not here for trouble," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I just want to talk to her." Jack shook his head. "You're not welcome here. And you're not going to hurt anyone else. Not anymore." The man hesitated for a moment, then turned and walked out of the diner, his boots echoing in the silence. Aisha stood there, her hands trembling but her heart strong. It was over. She was done running. And with the bikers by her side, she knew nothing could break her now. The day after her stepfather showed up at the diner was a blur for Aisha. The fear that had gripped her in that moment still clung to her, even though he was gone. She kept replaying the encounter in her mind, wondering if there was something she could have done differently. But as the day wore on, she began to realize something. She wasn't that scared girl anymore. She wasn't going to hide, not anymore. The bikers had kept their promise, and with their help, she had built something strong. She had a future now, a life that didn't revolve around fear. The idea that her stepfather was still out there didn't change that. That evening, as the sun set and the diner emptied out, Jack came in to check on her. He could see the tension in her eyes, even as she tried to mask it with a forced smile. He walked over to the counter where she was wiping down the surfaces. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low but filled with concern. Aisha looked up at him, meeting his gaze. "Yeah, I just keep thinking about what happened." It felt like everything came crashing down in that moment. But now, I know I don't have to be afraid anymore. Jack smiled, his eyes warm with approval. "You're right. You're stronger than you think, Aisha. And you've got us. You're not in this alone." Aisha nodded, the knot in her stomach starting to loosen. She had always feared that her past would define her, that the shadows of her stepfather's cruelty would follow her forever. But with Jack and the bikers by her side, she was starting to believe that she could leave that part of her life behind. She wasn't running anymore. The next morning, Aisha woke up early to the sound of birds singing outside the window. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with fresh air, and let it out slowly. It felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders. Today, she was going to take the next step. She had decided to go to the police station. It wasn't easy to admit that she needed help, that she couldn't do everything on her own. But she knew that for her to truly move on, she had to put the past to rest. She had to make sure her stepfather would never threaten her again. When Aisha walked into the police station, the weight of her decision hit her all at once. She had never been to the police before. Her stepfather had always made her feel like asking for help was a sign of weakness, but now, she realized how wrong he had been. She wasn't weak. She was strong. As she walked up to the desk, the officer behind it looked up, giving her a friendly smile. "How can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. Aisha hesitated for a moment, but then took a deep breath. "I need to file a report," she said, her voice steady. "I was threatened, and I think my stepfather is still a danger to me. The officer nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. Of course, take a seat. We'll get this taken care of. The process wasn't as difficult as Aisha had feared. She explained what had happened, her voice shaking slightly, but she didn't falter. She told them everything, the abuse, the threats, and how the bikers had helped her escape. The officers took notes, asking questions, making sure they had all the information they needed. When it was over, they assured her that they would take the matter seriously. We'll look into this, Aisha, the officer said. And if he shows up again, don't hesitate to call us. You're not alone. Aisha nodded, feeling a weight lift off her chest. She had done it. She had taken control of her future, and she had made sure her stepfather would no longer have power over her. As she left the station, she felt a surge of pride. She wasn't hiding anymore. She had faced her past, and now she was free to move forward. That night, after closing the diner, Aisha sat down with Jack and the bikers. They had gathered around the table, their usual camaraderie filling the room. I did it, Aisha said, her voice filled with a quiet triumph. I went to the police. Jack gave her an approving nod. I knew you would. You're not the same person you were when we first met. Aisha smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you for everything. The bikers raised their glasses, toasting to her strength and courage. For the first time in a long time, Aisha felt like she was truly living. She had built a new life for herself, and she was no longer held captive by fear. As the evening wore on, Aisha realized that she was finally at peace. She had faced her demons, and she had emerged stronger for it. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was living her life, on her own terms, with a future full of possibilities ahead of her. Months passed, and Aisha's life had slowly begun to shift in ways she hadn't thought possible. The diner, now fully under her management, had become her pride and joy. Every day was a little bit brighter, a little bit easier than the one before. She had found a rhythm that felt natural, as if she had always belonged here, in this quiet town, serving food to regulars who knew her name and exchanged friendly greetings. She had found peace, something she hadn't known in years. Every morning, she arrived early to make sure everything was ready before the doors opened. Jack and the bikers were always there to check in, ensuring everything ran smoothly. They were her extended family now, the people who had been there for her when no one else had been. And she was finally learning to let go of the past. Her stepfather had faded into the background, a memory she no longer feared. The police had taken care of the threat, and as each day passed without incident, she felt herself becoming more confident in her ability to move forward. One quiet afternoon, as the diner filled with the usual lunch crowd, Aisha stood behind the counter, pouring coffee for a regular. She had just come back from taking an order to a table when she heard the familiar sound of a motorcycle engine approaching outside. Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't panic. She wasn't that scared girl anymore. Jack walked through the door, a grin on his face, and two of the bikers with him. Aisha smiled, feeling the familiar warmth that always came when they visited. Hey, Aisha, Jack greeted, his voice as steady as ever. Everything good? She nodded, feeling a sense of pride. Yeah, everything's great. The diner's never been busier. The sound of motorcycles was always comforting now. It was a reminder of how far she had come, of the family she had found, and how much she had changed. That's what we like to hear, Jack said, giving her a nod of approval. Just wanted to stop by and make sure everything was going well. Aisha smiled as she looked around the diner. Yeah, I'm getting the hang of it. It feels like home now. The bikers shared a laugh, clearly pleased with how things had turned out for her. Jack leaned on the counter, his tone becoming more serious. We've been keeping tabs on things, Aisha. Your past, your stepdad, all of it. We're still watching out for you. She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She hadn't expected to ever feel so protected, so cared for. Thank you, Jack. I know you've got my back. And I'm not scared anymore. Jack's eyes softened, a rare warmth in them. You've done the hard work, Aisha. You've come so far. They spoke for a while longer, sharing stories and jokes, their usual banter filling the air. But the conversation shifted after a while. Jack and the bikers had noticed that Aisha wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. You've really made something of this place, Aisha. One of the bikers, Bear, commented as he took a seat at the counter. You turned this diner into something special. Aisha smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't the same person who had walked into this diner months ago. She had a future now, one that she was building every day. "It's been a lot of work," she said, her voice steady, "but it's been worth it." Bear grinned, raising his glass of iced tea. "To you then, for showing us what real strength looks like." The bikers all raised their glasses, and Aisha felt a deep sense of belonging. It was moments like these that made her realize just how far she had come. She had not only escaped her past, but had built a life she was proud of. As the night fell and the diner grew quieter, Aisha stood outside, looking up at the stars. The cool air was refreshing, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could truly breathe. The weight of the past had been lifted, and now, all that remained was the future. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was living, and she had built this life herself, with help from the people who cared about her, but it was her strength, her determination, that had gotten her this far. Aisha was ready for whatever came next. She was no longer defined by her past. She was defined by the woman she had become. And as the days passed, she knew that nothing could take that away from her. The diner, the bikers, and her own will to move forward were all pieces of her new life. A life that was hers to shape. And for the first time, Aisha was free. Free to be who she truly was, without fear, without regret. The future was waiting, and she was ready to face it head on.